Hi, friends. I'm Scott Hanselman, and I'm just so happy to be here at js.la having fun. I actually had planned on coming down here and hanging out with you all as early as April. Ben Runyon just reminded me that I was going to come down in April of 2019, but then the apocalypse happened, so I'm here virtually, and I'm thrilled to be here with wonderful people and speakers like Val, who started out the show here. What I'm going to do is talk about the joy that I'm having developing on Windows. I know it's just scandalous to say such a thing, but I'm having all kinds of a blast doing it. I like Windows, but I don't historically like the command prompt and some of the ways that Windows hurt me. Doing Node on Windows was challenging with some native modules, not having Bash and these different kinds of things. The historically bad terminal on Windows has been challenging. If you've ever tried to get things working Windows, you might just be driven to a Mac. But the great thing about Windows now is you can do all kinds of cool stuff. Now, back in the day, you would do something like this. You'd open up command.exe, and you'd be in this thing that was like DOS, but not DOS. And the thing that was bad about this is that if you're a Windows developer and you find yourself on the internet Googling for how to do something, and you say, hey, I want to do a thing. And then I go find a website that says, hey, here's how to do it. And it says, how to install foo. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to install foo. This is great. And it says, okay, open a terminal. And you're like, what? And then it says, go here. And then it's like, well, okay, that's not what my thing looks like. My thing looks like that. Where's my place? Am I not allowed to do things if my prompt looks like a $? And then Windows people are sad. And that's all really a bummer. Now, the thing to remember is that on Windows, there are a lot of shells. And this can be a little bit overwhelming for folks, but it's important to remember that the difference between a console, a terminal, and a shell are all different things. So I'm just going to open up a whole bunch of shells here just to be obnoxious. And I've got PowerShell, and I've got Git Bash, and there's actually Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core and this and that and the other thing. We've got MinGW, we've got PowerShell here, we've got original DOS, but not really DOS right there. The terminal is this thing that drew the Chrome. The shell is the thing that took the string and did something with it. Terminals paint, shells deal with strings. So there's PowerShell, and then there's the DOS thing, and then there's the one that comes with Git. This one is interesting because a lot of people who are doing web dev use it because then you've got that friendly $, and you think, oh, cool, I can do Linuxy things now. But in fact, this is a lie because MinGW and things like this aren't really Linux. They're the GNU user mode utilities that have been recompiled, linked against Windows, and it gives you kind of Linuxy user space, but it's really just the stuff that you need to run Bash scripts, which is cool and awesome, but to be clear, it's not Linux. It's not Linux at all. Plus, we have a crappy terminal. So step one, get a less crappy terminal. The Windows terminal rather, is open source, and you can go and get the Windows terminal. It's like Xterm or iTunes True or something like that. And it does a cool drop down, and you can see I've got a million different things in the list here. That terminal works with anything. So if you like Git Bash, you like Cygwin, you like PowerShell, whatever, you can use it because this terminal is open source. It's super shiny. It's got like acrylic, which is hot. It's got cool fonts and ligatures and power lines and things like that and nerd fonts. I can do cool things like this where I'll go and jump over to, like, let's say a repository. So I've got my power line with my current branch, got 2 items added, got definitely a dirty situation here with Git. You notice that I can go and do this and make things, like I'm scrolling with my mouse, scrolling. I can make things acrylic. Ooh, look, the background change, that's hot. All kinds of stuff. You can have animated GIFs. It's a fully modern thing. That's huge. Doesn't change the shell situation, though. You've got your choice of shells. So I can use the kind of fake user mode Linux thing, the Cygwin thing, or I can use something like PowerShell, which makes me happy, and that's cool. But if I were going to go and run Linux on Windows, historically the way that you do it is you run a virtual machine. And virtual machines are great, except they're virtual machines. They're heavy. They're overwhelming. It's like, hey, run Linux as a 30 gig virtual machine. That'll be great. And then you're running a computer within a computer. You're dealing with startup time. It's depressing. And it's also kind of unwieldy. And you end up looking at a square within a square within a square, which is annoying. But there's a thing called WSL. And WSL is the Windows subsystem for Linux. I'm going to type in WSL-list-V, and it's going to show me that I've actually got not one, but I've got 7 different Linuxes all running here. 2 of them are supporting Docker, so 5 individual Linux distributions. I've got this thing called WSL2 that I'll talk about, and I've got one called WSL1. These are different versions. This is shipping with Windows. This is something you already have. You have the Windows subsystem for Linux. You just never turned it on. If you have a Windows machine, even if your friends or your kids or kids that you know, students have a Windows machine, just go to the Windows store, type Linux, and what these Linuxes are, you think like, well, I don't want a Linux that came out of the Windows store. Thanks, Microsoft, with the $sign. That's stupid. These are just tar files, and they're actually owned by Canonical or Kali or whoever. Additionally, you can make your own tar file and have your own Linux distribution. If you're an enterprise, you can ship your own Linux distribution, so you don't have to feel bad. We're just using the Windows Store as a content distribution network for these tar files. You get Debian, whatever makes you happy, OpenSUSE. You bring that down, and then you start up your own Linux on this machine. So if I go and do this, if I type bash, remember that a virtual machine is really slow, it's depressing, it's heavy. I'm going to just type bash, I'm going to go 1000, 1000. Okay, so I just started up Linux in 1 second. Now, LSB release, let's make sure I'm not lying, because you never know, could be lying. Nope, that's actually Linux. It looks like it's Ubuntu 18.04. It's a real thing. Notice that I've also got Ubuntu 20.04. You see it says stopped right here. I could say WSL-D, and then I could say Ubuntu-20.04. So this is one that's starting up cold. -D is for distro, 1000. Oops, actually I'm trying to run WSL within WSL. Wah, wah. I'm gonna go ahead and just select that, and then copy paste that, put it down here, 1000. I just started up Ubuntu 20.04. So I've actually got Ubuntu 18.04 here. There's the Ubuntu colors, that's lovely. And then I've got Ubuntu 20.04 here, totally different. I can go and start HTOP just because HTOP is awesome. And I can move around and do all kinds of things here. Now notice that I've got this mount point. I've automatically got access to my Windows files from this mount point if I want to. But it's not super fast because what they're doing is basically a Plan 9 server, and they're talking back and forth through NTFS and all that kind of stuff. You don't want to do that. You want to be spending your time here. This is the actual Windows file system. So C user Scott is Windows / home Scott is Linux. That's cool because in there I've got different stuff that I'm working on, and maybe I've got, let me see here. This is 18. There we go. I've got like a to-do app. Here we go. And I've got like a full stack TypeScript to-do. And now this is the Linux file system. But you say, hang on, you said you like Windows, so that must mean that you like the Windows Explorer window. So how do I get to my Linux stuff from the Windows Explorer here? Here's where your brain gets exploded. So if I did something like this, vim foo.text, I'm in vim, and I'm going to like, hey, cool, it's Linux. And I go, boop, 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 pop. Okay, there's this foo.text sitting on Linux. Check this out. I can go Notepad. Of course, Notepad doesn't run because we're in Linux. But I can type notepad.exe. It will fail on Linux, and then we'll pass it to Windows. And I can launch Notepad from Linux. Linux gets the first chance. Windows gets the second chance, which then means I could go Notepad. I know I'm comparing Notepad and Vim, so excuse me for offending. Notice I have to say .exe, otherwise it doesn't actually count. And then look, I'm in Notepad, so I'm looking at foo.text. Then you're like, well, hang on, that's not good. Well, we updated Notepad, so it supports Linux line feeds. So that's hot. Okay, cool. What could I do here? I could say explorer.exe, and then say dot for the current folder. Open that up. Inside of the Windows Explorer are my Linux files. We're running a Plan 9 server, so we're talking basically over the local network right there. Here's where it gets crazy cool. Look at this. All of my Linuxes that are currently running actually show up as file servers locally here, which allows me to use the tools that I want to. That's kind of cool. I also want to point out the fact that this thing started up in a second. This isn't a VM in the big, heavy virtual hard drive, 30 gigabyte kind of VM. This is a lightweight utility VM. It does use a hypervisor, but now with the new VMwares and the virtual boxes, you can actually have Hyper-V and those things side by side. So this doesn't necessarily preclude you using your favorite things like VMware. What's interesting about this, though, is that there are a lot of students, a lot of people on $299 laptops from Walmart that are running Windows Home. And historically, you could only run these things on Windows 10 Pro. That sucks. So Microsoft made it so you can do these things on Home. You don't get Hyper-V, but you get the hypervisor underlying platform, which means that students can just have Linux. They can type bash, they see that $, and they can do whatever they want to. Now here's where it gets even weirder. Let's do this. Let's go here and let's say, let's look at the client. Here's a client for my application. And I could go and type code, but how would I run Visual Studio Code? I'm in Linux, but remember, we get a moment there where we can pop up. But let's go and say which code. Okay, code is going to somehow launch outside here, and I'm going to say code dot pop up Visual Studio Code. Now this is a Windows app. I ran a Windows app. This is super important. Check this out. It knows the context in which it was launched, and this is super important. It splits in half. Splits in half. Let's switch back over here. Let's run htop. We can see that there's a VS Code server running in Linux. Again, lightweight. You're seeing that I'm zipping around here. I'm not having any trouble. Again, you can do this on any machine. It's not a huge deal. You have full processor. I've got 20 processors here. My machine's doing just fine. So I said code dot. It started up with WSL. So we're using WSL. We ran it locally. We split Visual Studio in half. So when I go File, Open File, look at this here. Look at that. That's the Linux file system. And here it says Show Local, which would be the Windows file system. I'm opening these things up. I can do whatever I want. In this case here, I've got a markdown file, and then I've got a preview on the side here. It's just doing what I want to do. It's Visual Studio Code, which is super cool. And then from here, I can go and do whatever I want, and I can open a terminal. So now I've opened up a terminal down here, which is inside of VS Code, but is Linux on Windows. Super fast, super cool. Additionally, I wanted to, my Docker context is here. And my Docker context, this is in Linux. I'm in Linux. Now let's switch over to Windows, Docker images. My Docker context is shared, one Docker. Just like native Docker, like you get on Linux or on Mac, because it is. That brings up some really, really interesting things. So let's say that I don't want to have my source in WSL. I don't even want to install all this stuff. I had to install NPM and Node. I had to basically get my machine started, which is fine, but it took me some time. It's a little bit annoying. One of the things that I could potentially do is I could, if I wanted to do a language that I'm not used to, let's see what other languages I have here. Let's try this. I don't have Go on this machine. I don't have Go installed anywhere on my computer. So I'm just going to go and say code dot. I'm going to start this up. I've launched Visual Studio Code for Windows from Linux, and it's going to say, hang on, this is in a dev container. Do you want to reopen this folder and develop in a container? I'm like, yeah, cool, whatever that means. So here it says, down here on the left, it says WSL. We're going to say opening a dev container. What it's going to do is going to talk to Docker. It's going to open up this dev container JSON, which points to a Docker file. Look at that. All kinds of cool 3D accelerated stuff right now, but just impress me with some nice ASCII art. We're going pulling the layers that I need to be a Go developer on this thing. Maybe someone handed me this. Maybe I just checked it out. Doing all the stuff we need to do because it's using Docker. Everything's going to be fast and cached, which is hot. And then if we go over here under extensions, while that's loading, notice we have local installed extensions. It's Windows, so that would be extensions installed in Windows. Down here, it's only going to install the stuff that I want in that container. So in the Go container or the Node container or whatever, which means that you can just have one container that does your build, your test, your run. That can be your entire development experience. This will just start up one time really, really fast because it's got to go and do all this kind of stuff, but it'll be instantaneous because the layers will be cached in a minute. So blah, blah, blah. This is all cachy stuff. And you can see that, my machine's very responsive and it's doing its own thing. And then in a minute here, you notice how the Go is just text. It doesn't have color, doesn't have syntax highlighting or anything interesting. That's because the Visual Studio server hasn't fired up yet. When you split Visual Studio in half, you have the client side, which does all the text drawing and stuff. Oh, hey, see, it just turned color. Look at that, just turned color. That's hot. Okay, cool. So if I go and say IO dot, yeah, it's saying nothing. It says, hey, the Go extension is recommended. So I'm going to go and install that. And I'm going to say, all right, cool. Let's install the Go extension in this thing. We come back and we start that dev container up. It's going to start a lot faster this time because it's doing everything from a already cached experience. And then it says, cool, inside the dev container is Go or JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever version makes you happy. Now the terminal that I've got down here isn't WSL. It is the container. Down here, you can see I've opened up a container, but I'm using WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux, to drive Docker, because this is now, to be clear, Windows 10 ships a Linux kernel. It is a real LTS Linux kernel. So I come back here and I type IO dot, get my IntelliSense. Who drew this? Where did this come from when I pushed dot? There's the thing that paints the text, and when you hit dot, the language services are remoted. So if it's TypeScript or Go or Rust or whatever, it's running in the container. The Visual Studio Code server runs over there, which means that I could potentially go and hit F9 here and put a breakpoint and then hit F5, because that's what you do, or at least actually if you don't like got here debugging, which I understand is very popular. You notice that this server is popped up and listening on a port. So if I decide to go on localhost 9000, my way to glory, I'm now at a breakpoint. So to be clear, I'm at a breakpoint inside of a language that I don't have installed on my machine because it's running in a dev container. So I can do the kind of development that I want to do. If we actually go back up here and we go down into our to-do application, and I run my full stack TypeScript to-do, and we do a little yarn run, and then we open up, yarn start, yarn something. Oh, darn it. Thanks, friends. I need to go down one. Look at me having to have two scripts. Scandalous. Two for my client and my server. I should do better. I'm going to open up another one of these. And then I'm going to go and switch out there. And we'll go back down into do. And I'll go back down into full stack. And I'll go back down into here. I should probably have done this earlier. And we'll yarn start that action. And that's hot. Now I've got my 4,000 and my 3,000, and then we'll go back here. Now I've got a React app, and I'm chilling. And my React app is talking back to a Mongo database. Right now I'm in Atlas. A Mongo database could certainly be in a container or SQL Server on Linux or whatever makes me happy. But the thing that's cool here is I'm able to move around and experience development in the world that I like, the world I enjoy, which is Windows, use the tools that I like, and I've got full Linux compatibility, not Darwin on a Mac, not whatever else. I'm not a big fan of the some of the Linux windowing systems. I get to choose what I want to use. I could use Screen, I could use Vim, I could use Emacs, I could use whatever. And I can change the style and look and feel of this, the fonts, and have as many Linuxes as make me happy, as well as I can go and search for WSL custom distro. Custom distro. Beep, boop, bop, boop. Look at that. Official Microsoft documentation on how to create a custom distribution. So you could put one in the store, you can have a launcher of your own, which means I could go and hand you a launcher and say, hey, look, this is how we do things now. And what's cool about that is that WSL allows folks, again, who would struggle with things like PuTTY and not have SSH and things like that on their machines. I can do something like this. Using WSL, I actually went and I changed my Windows terminal. I plugged in like Minicom to do serial COM port communication, so I could go and do some node bots and cool stuff like that and talk on an Arduino over a serial port. The world is your oyster on any machine. Any machine is a good developer machine. I'm having all kinds of good fun with this, and I hope that you check it out. I've got a series that I want to point you to on my YouTube channel where I talk about such things under playlists. A couple things for you to check out. First one is how to use Windows 10 with Beyonce. And then the other one that's making me happy that I would encourage you to share with your friends is computer stuff that they didn't teach you. A whole series about that. I talk about Docker, you get 101. You probably know this stuff, but you probably know somebody who doesn't know this stuff. And that's cool as well. I walk through how all of this stuff works. And if you go over to that playlist, it talks about technical previews and whatnot. We talk about customizing your terminal, developing on this stuff. I've got a really fun one that you might get a kick out of, where I sat down with a person who had just got a Windows machine, moving over from a Mac. They want to get it all set up. This is a real unscripted thing. I called my friend, and for 45 minutes, we spent time setting up his machine for success. Diehard Mac person, very much enjoyed it, and is now able to do all the things they want to do in a really joyful and cool place on the Windows terminal with Windows Subsystem for Linux. That is my talk, entirely done as one run-on sentence. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I guess I'll go play in Rambly if that's okay with David and our friends and Denise at JS.la.